Hello, anyone online? We're going to wait a few more minutes to see if we have any stragglers, and then we'll get started. She's on?
Wanted to join online.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is she in the meeting room or?
I don't think she asked us, so maybe she signed in. No, she
I think
would
she did, but.
potentially joined as a, well, we have the assemblyman here. I'm gonna make him a panelist.
Which one? Oh, Bobby?
That's the chair.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
I don't know if this helps you in any way, but she sent the email.
that she's approved, yeah.
Fine, so people. Okay, good seeing you. Whenever you want to begin, I'm going to do the roll call.
Yeah, we'll wait until Katie's online.
Okay. There's water cooler in the back. Started yet, so right at. I can see what I could find. The assemblyman asked if he could speak early in the program.
Sure. You need like napkins or paper towels or something? There's a kitchen behind that set of IKEA cabinets.
There's no kitchen there.
There's a water cooler there.
That's right. There's a microwave.
Right. That's sort of like a kitchen, having a water cooler and a microwave. I think I see some Clorox wipes or something. Was that a pod espresso machine?
Yes, it is, but nobody uses it. Because I have my own. You gotta bring your own coffee.
That's an idea. Showing up just with your own coffee pods and making yourself, but
Well, why not? People show up with their own food and stuff.
that's true. Maybe that would increase turnout to our meetings if we had a budget for food.
We used to have a 50-50, but before COVID,
Mhm.
but, we never went back to that. No, we'd have a drawing and sell tickets. The person would win 50% and the board would keep 50% and put it towards a coffee fund.
Oh. Little fundraiser.
Yeah, actually, it wasn't the board. It was individuals from the board because it was
Right.
not an official government activity. And that's why the district manager had nothing to do.
The Friends of Community Board 7, yeah. Is that our nonprofit that's defunct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Friends of CB7, yeah.
I think Joe Longobardi was the last chairperson of that. You remember Joe Longobardi? I believe he was last chairperson in 2009. Ed Wade, yeah, he's gone probably 6 or 7 years now. You started maybe about 2 or 3 years
Okay.
before the homeless shelter meetings? So you must have started 16 or 17?
Five oh one C three. They mean slightly different things. One's for profit and one's not.
I don't see Katie here.
Yeah, I'm waiting for her to text me back, but we might just start without her. I'll have Aaron on.
And maybe we just went home.
Yeah, let's just
Announcement?
start.
Well, just make an announcement that we're still waiting. Hi, folks. If you're joining us on Zoom, we're still waiting for a couple of people to arrive. We will be starting shortly. Yep, we're live on YouTube now.
Yeah, let's call them. Exactly. Exactly. All right, we're going to call roll.
Good evening, everyone. If you're joining us on Zoom, please remember to unmute yourself, acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. We're going to start this 2 committees. We will start with Land Use and Landmarks. Diana Gonzalez.
Here.
Thank you. Aaron Keith. Joan Body. Gabino Morales Escamilla.
Present.
You. Gabino, you do not count towards quorum. Julia Melzer Harris. Nicholas Jackson. Thank you. Jeremy Kaplan. I thought I saw him. Paul Mack. Oh. No, he's not on my screen. That's strange. Yep, I see his name, Jeremy Kaplan. Well, Karen acknowledges you. That's good enough for me. You do not count towards quorum, however. Karen can't give you that. Paul Mack. Antoinette Martinez. Karen Rolnick. Thank you. Damaris Santiago. John Santor. Thank you. John, you do not count towards quorum, nor do you count against quorum. Maria Roca. Three board members in the room, no quorum. We will move on to Transportation Committee. Katie Walsh. John DeLuper.
Present.
Thank you. Joan Body. George Cardona. Jerry Chan. Jamie Freed. Daniel Kaminsky. Roberto Martinez. Gabino Morales.
Here.
Gabino, you do not count towards quorum. Maria Roca. Sam Sierra. Faye Walker. Thank you. Two in the room, you do not have quorum. And if I could say on a personal note, while I have the floor, there's a Knick game tonight, so I would appreciate if everybody could talk fast. I have my priorities.
Okay, I'd like to give this time to Assemblymember Lester Chang to speak.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you for having me allow you to speak. Right now, I'm in Albany right now. A lot of bills that we have to continue to talk about. That. Thank God we passed the budget. But I just want to pass out a alarming news on PS 176. That's on Bay Ridge Avenue and 12th Avenue. They're in the midst of constructions for the past several years. And our parents was concerned about, to me, especially concerned a couple of weeks ago regarding about asbestos issues in there. So I'm written letters to the city and to the chancellor and to city to school constructions and try to get some answers to the bottom of it. I know school will end in summer in 6 weeks or less from now, so school safety is important. I want to make sure the air quality with the students are safe. So I just want to pass out the information out to any parents who have students or workers at PS 176. And thank you very much for having me speaking. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, I guess next up, let's start your presentation. Yeah, we'll put the mic on the.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name, oh, okay, sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Free. I am a planner with the Department of City Planning and the project manager for this last mile facility tax amendment. Thank you for joining today. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll give an overview of the proposed text amendment. Next slide. Thank you. So the topic of today's meeting is the last mile facility text amendment. This text amendment would create and introduce a special permit and introduce a public review process for new last mile facilities. And throughout the presentation, I'll cover things like what is a last mile facility? Why have they become more common in New York City? What's a special permit? Why is it being proposed? And then how can you continue to participate in the development of a special permit? Next slide. Okay, so before jumping in, I wanted to show you the steps required to create a special permit in the zoning resolution. We're early on, so this is a really good time to be involved. Everything in this teal color, we are right now in environmental review for this process. And so last summer, the Department of City Planning announced plans to propose and advance a last mile facility special permit. That's when we launched our website and started having early conversations with a key group of stakeholders. Then, most recently, a month ago, we released a draft proposal in the form of a draft scope of work. This document, along with an environmental assessment statement and EAS, is what officially kicked off our environmental review process. And as a reminder, environmental review, this is the time period where the environmental impact of the proposed special permit will be studied. Then we had a info session where we gave a very similar presentation and had live Q&A. A recording of that presentation is on the Department of City Planning's website and on our YouTube page. Then we had a scoping meeting, which was an opportunity for people to provide spoken comments on the proposal, and those comments make it into the public record. We are also currently in the public scoping period. So even if you weren't able to meet the scoping meeting, this Friday is a deadline for providing written comments on the draft scope of work. And then following that, so right now is a really important time because the comments being made make it into the public record. And those comments are what help us revise our proposal. So after we finish hearing back from people, we'll go back, revise the proposal, and then following the teal, following environmental review is what comes next is land use review. So that's the formal process to adopt a new special permit into zoning. It includes public review by community boards, borough presidents, city planning commission, and city council. So next slide. Okay, so kind of want to zoom out and discuss the state of deliveries in New York City. Next slide. Today is the easiest it's ever been to shop online. No surprise there to anyone here. With the rise of e-commerce, changing consumer preferences, and population growth, there's been increased demand for packages in New York City and the facilities that deliver those packages. So in 2017, approximately 1.1 million packages were delivered daily in New York City. Last year, it was 2.5 million. So that's an increase of over 200%. It also means that 1 in 3 New Yorkers will receive a package today. Next slide. Now, delivering all those packages to New Yorkers is a logistical feat with its fair share of challenges, from parcel packing and sorting in warehouses to getting to your doorstep. There are many steps in the process. And of course, the part that everyone is most familiar with is at the end of the supply chain, or what's on the right side of the screen. Delivery trucks out on the street, couriers with hand carts, and of course, an occasional stolen package. Next page. So because getting goods to New Yorkers is so critical, the city is doing a lot to promote sustainable delivery, thinking about lowering emissions from industrial-related trips and reducing the vehicular impact of industrial facilities on residential and mixed-use neighborhoods. So on the operations side, on the left, there are programs that are encouraging off-hour deliveries during less congested times of the day. Also redesigning the truck network, installing shared use lockers where you could pick up your package, permitting micro hubs and micro distribution, proposing an indirect source rule, and planning holistically for industrial uses. On the vehicle and charging front in orange, there are also initiatives retrofitting and replacing heavy polluting trucks, creating shared electric vehicle charging hubs for trucks, encouraging cargo bikes and safe charging, as well as developing maritime blue freight highways to support mode shift from trucks to waterways. So this is to just demonstrate that we see the special permit as one tool in the toolbox to promote a more sustainable freight network. Next slide. Okay, back to the last mile facility text amendment. What's a last mile facility? Next slide. There are often multiple warehouses that an order passes through before making it to your doorstep. These warehouses are also sometimes called first, middle, and last mile. So first you place your order. You really want this teddy bear. The order is processed and fulfilled in a first mile warehouse. So that teddy bear you wanted is picked off the shelf and put into a box to be loaded onto a truck. In the case of New York City, this first mile warehouse might be somewhere like Pennsylvania or even further. Then the boxes are unloaded into a middle mile facility. So maybe somewhere like New Jersey. And there your box with your bear is sorted by subregion and put onto another truck as it gradually makes its way closer to you. Next slide. So then the final warehouse before delivery is a last mile facility. So that second truck we were talking about is unloaded into a last mile facility, in this case, often within New York City boundaries, where your package is sorted by delivery route. So here you see light and medium duty vehicles delivering that bear just in time. And this final warehouse before delivery, this last mile facility, is also more specifically what we are calling a parcel delivery facility and is what we're proposing to regulate with this special permit. Next slide. So as demand for packages has increased, so too has demand for the facilities that deliver those packages. More specifically, demand for fast deliveries requires that warehouses be located near consumers. And for that reason, over the last 20 years or so, we've been seeing an increase in last mile facilities in New York City, especially leading up to and during the pandemic. Next slide. So last mile facilities are often sited near where people live in order to meet short delivery times. We've all been stuck in New York City traffic, and the closer you are to your destination, the more likely you are to make it there on time. Last mile facilities also tend to be located near major roadways and industrial zones. They are permitted today to be in industrial zones. Last mile facilities generally occupy large sites. So these large sites allow for room for vehicular maneuverability, fleet parking. And we also tend to see last mile facilities have substantial ground floor space, which makes it easier to load and unload goods. Next slide. Now, large last mile facilities or parcel delivery facilities, these tend to generate more traffic than a traditional warehouse. Parcel delivery facilities prioritize the movement of goods rather than other common warehousing activities like long to medium term storage, assembly activities, or pick and pack where an order is being fulfilled. Last mile facilities tend to have a high vehicle throughput and a high goods throughput. They can also operate up to 24 hours a day. So according to the Institute of Transportation Engineers, a parcel hub, which is the closest category that the ITE uses for a parcel delivery facility, generates 2.5 times more vehicles on an average weekday than a standard warehouse. These high vehicle trips then affect congestion, traffic, safety, air quality. We also see most medium-duty vehicles associated with parcel delivery facilities, like what you see out on the street, walk-in or multi-stop trucks. These continue to rely on diesel engines, while the light-duty vehicle options like Sprinter vans typically run on gas. We've seen parcel delivery operators begin investing in electrifying their fleets, but it takes time and money to acquire the EVs and to have the power to charge them. Since last mile facilities tend to locate as close as possible to consumers, these challenges of high trip generation are felt by New Yorkers who live the closest to these facilities. In other words, New Yorkers who live near industrial areas. Next slide. Okay, so with the increase in last mile facilities in New York City, we've heard calls to regulate these facilities differently from regular warehouses. We've listened, which is why we are proposing this last mile facility tax amendment. Next slide. So the last mile facility tax amendment has three main goals. The first one is to introduce a public review process for new, larger last mile facilities. Second, to shift development of new facilities further from where New Yorkers live. And three, to encourage the use of sustainable delivery modes. In zoning terms, what that means is introducing the term parcel delivery facility as a use in the New York City zoning resolution, and then to create a city planning commission special permit for most new large facilities. Next slide. Before going into the details of the special permit, I just want to talk a little bit about what a special permit is. So today, if you wanted to open a new last mile facility, a new parcel delivery facility, you would take your plans to the Department of Buildings to be reviewed. If your plans were up to code and approved, then you could open your facility. This is as of right development, and it's how most development happens in New York City. Next slide. So what would change with the special permit process? With the special permit process, there's the introduction of public review, or ULURP, Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. You would then take your plans for a new parcel delivery facility to the community board. You would take it here. You would take it to the borough president for comment. Then there would be a city planning commission and city council hearing and vote. In making their determination to approve an applicant for a special permit, there would be a set of criteria to look at, and those criteria are called findings, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides. So then, if you were granted a special permit, then you would go to DOB for approval to open your facility. Next slide. So like I said, the text amendment would do two things. It would add parcel delivery facility as a new use in the zoning resolution and create that special permit. So today, a parcel delivery facility is considered a warehouse, and it's categorized under what we call use group 9, general storage. So what we're proposing to do is add parcel delivery facility as a distinct use, also under the general storage use group category. So the exact definition of a parcel delivery facility and the structure of this special permit are things we're looking for feedback on. For now, we've defined a parcel delivery facility as a type of distribution warehouse used primarily for unloading and sorting pre-packed goods and reloading those goods onto vehicles certified as Federal Highway Administration vehicle weight classes 1 through 5 for final delivery. Just a note on those weight classes. Those are the types of light duty and most medium duty vehicles that you see out on the street today delivering delivering packages. So this includes things like SUVs, utility vans, step vans, walk-in vans, small box trucks. Inside a parcel delivery facility or a last mile facility, little to none of the following activities occur. Extended inventory storage, that's where your teddy bear is being stored on the shelves. Picking and packing, where the teddy bear is taken off the shelf into your box. Wholesale distribution, or in-person retail. Just a note on this definition, this is the definition we've been using for environmental review. It's not zoning text because we're not in land use review yet. Next slide. So under current zoning, a parcel delivery facility, a warehouse, is not permitted in our residential and commercial zoning districts. That would remain the same with the proposed text amendment. You can't open a new parcel delivery facility or a warehouse anywhere in gray. Next slide. So what we're really focused on is in teal. These are our manufacturing zoning districts. These are our parts of the city with a range of industrial and commercial uses. So today, you could open a new parcel delivery facility or warehouse as of right in these areas. With the text amendment, you would generally need a special permit to open a new, larger parcel delivery facility in teal. Next slide. Okay, back to those criteria I mentioned earlier. So to receive a special permit, the City Planning Commission determines whether an application meets certain subjective criteria. Those are findings, and they include things like proximity. So this is the location of a proposed parcel delivery facility relative to communities disproportionately affected by the negative impacts of environmental pollution. Concentration. So this is the potential for an inappropriate concentration of last mile facilities in a given area. Environmental impact. The potential for a new parcel delivery facility to create or contribute significantly to reduced air quality, increased greenhouse gas emissions, or increased stormwater runoff. There's also a finding about remediation. So the need to undertake environmental remediation work on the lot. Is the applicant doing the bare minimum, or are they going, above and beyond to remediate the land? There's another one about traffic and safety. This is the potential for a new parcel delivery facility to contribute to serious traffic congestion or unduly inhibit pedestrian flow, and also a proposed finding about parking and loading. This is about the size and configuration of off-street parking and loading on the lot in order to not disrupt pedestrian and auto-related activity in the public right-of-way. Next slide. There are also exemptions to the special permit, and these are to ensure that small facilities and facilities using sustainable delivery modes, those that are meeting the city's environmental and sustainability goals, can continue to be developed as of right. So the first exemption is for a facility less than a certain size. The threshold we've chosen for now is 50,000 square feet of floor area. Most parcel delivery facilities that exist today operate at a larger square footage than that. And also generally smaller facilities tend to generate less impacts than the larger ones. So we're really focused on the large ones. Second, a water dependent parcel delivery facility would be exempt from the special permit. In the zoning resolution today, we have something called a water-dependent warehouse, and that's a warehouse that ships or receives materials or products by water, as evidenced by operational docking facilities on the zoning lot. Now, exactly how to define a water-dependent parcel delivery facility is something we'd like to hear thoughts on. Our intention is to not inhibit the potential growth of maritime freight in New York City. The third exemption would be for a parcel delivery facility with electric vehicle infrastructure that is also a facility far from residents. That would mean a facility more than 500 feet from a zoning district that permits residences and meets certain electric vehicle charging infrastructure standards would be exempt from the special permit. Similar to water dependent, this is one where we put our intention out there and would love to hear comments on what a reasonable electric vehicle standard is. Again, these exemptions are designed to not let the special permit burden smaller parcel delivery operations or those operations using sustainable modes of delivery. Next slide. Okay, so now to talk a little bit about environmental review. Next slide. So this is the period we're in right now. If you can remember from earlier on the timeline slide, we're in the teal, we're in environmental review. So we're still really early on. We're not in orange, we're not in land use review yet. So what we've put out is called a draft scope of work, or DSOW. And this is a document that outlines what will be studied in environmental review. Next. And as part of environmental review, there are many different categories that are studied, and the text is small on this side, so I can't read it, but hopefully everyone is familiar with the different types of chapters in environmental review. So as we're going through it, we'll be thinking about things like, yeah, that's okay. Sorry about that. Things like air quality, yeah, transportation, there are so many. Sorry, yeah, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, disadvantaged communities. No, it's okay. Thanks, though. Noise, public health, and so on. So this is just to say that there are different sections in environmental review that you can also provide comment on. Okay, next slide. Okay, thanks. So at the beginning of this presentation, I said I would cover a couple of things. So I just want to recap. What is a last mile facility? It's a general term to describe the final warehouse before delivery. And for the text amendment, we're proposing a more specific term, a parcel delivery facility. Why have these facilities become more common in New York City? With the rise of e-commerce, changing consumer preferences, and population growth, that means there are more direct-to-consumer packages with faster shipping coming into the city every day. What's a special permit? It's a public review process for certain new developments. In this case, it would require a case-by-case, site-specific review of most new larger parcel delivery facilities in New York City. Why is the special permit being proposed? There were three main reasons. The first is to introduce a public review process for those new larger last mile facilities. Second, to shift development of new last mile facilities further from where people live. These are the areas where we're seeing the most conflicts, where residential is adjacent to industrial. And three, to encourage the use of sustainable delivery modes. Getting New Yorkers those goods is critical, and so we want to do so in the best way possible. We recognize that parcel delivery facilities play a critical role in ensuring New Yorkers receive goods ordered online in a timely and efficient manner. But as demand for delivery grows, so have the conflicts between the facilities that manage those deliveries and city residents. So we want to ensure the appropriate siting of future parcel delivery facilities. Also, how can you continue to participate in the text amendment process? You are doing so by being at this meeting, but you can submit written comments until May 16th. Next slide. Okay, I just want to reiterate here that we are early on in the text amendment process and we value community feedback on it. Right now is a really great time because the further we get along in the process, the less the proposal can change for various legal reasons. So while there will be many more opportunities to give your opinions on this policy, this deadline of May 16th is an important date. Last slide. Okay, and then also if you want more information, please visit our website. There you will find several documents, including the proposal in the document called Draft Scope of Work. This outlines the proposal in more detail and the environmental review process. Also, you can find a recording of the info session and the scoping hearing. And if you have any questions, you can also email lastmile@planning.nyc.gov, which goes straight to my inbox and is listed on the website. Also on the website are the instructions for how to submit written comments. There is a very specific email you have to send it to, and that email is on our website. And next slide. Okay, and that's it.
Thank
So-
you.
Yeah.
Stick around. Okay, so I am going to start by, so Katie has had technical difficulties and she's watching on the YouTube right now. So she has a question for you. Can we potentially go back to that slide that had all of the things that were being considered? The one with the really long list that was near the end.
What was
The
actions?
proposed, the
Yeah.
impacts.
One with this list.
Wait, it was, that was it. Yes, okay. So. All right, so I see open space, so presumably that means parks and playgrounds. Are schools on this list?
Generally, there is school, we measure the impact on schools. It's generally whether it would increase the number of seats that are needed at the school, which obviously with a last mile facility, there isn't an increase in seats. But it will be looked at in the environmental review. And I think more generally, I think there's been comments around whether in the special permit findings, rather than, this is like the list of things that will be reviewed as part of the text amendment, but in the special permit findings, like its proximity to sensitive receptors, I think is something that we've heard a lot about and is included as one of the possible considerations that city planning commissioners and elected officials would look at.
Okay, I think it would be useful to look at it in the environmental impact statement as well, and also things like senior centers, any kind of community gathering spaces that are going to generate foot traffic, possibly even houses of worship, right? Because a lot of the issue with last mile facilities is street safety. It's not just environmental, it's not just about the traffic, it's about street safety. And so, yeah, and so then, Jeremy, I'm going to turn it over to you for your question. And I have a very long list, and then I'll turn it over to the vice chairs and then committee members and then the general public.
So last year, the board voted on City of Yes. I believe the one for commercial zones had 18 different aspects. Am I correct? That was the one. And we voted for some and we voted against some. And I believe we voted against having, as of right, smaller distribution hubs on our commercial, within our commercial zones. And will this now incentivize businesses having larger trucks skip the last mile facilities to distribute at several smaller distribution facilities around the neighborhood or various neighborhoods?
Okay, so just for anyone who is not familiar with City of Yes for Opportunity, I believe what you're referring to is the new micro distribution rules. So what those rules were doing were permitting micro distribution, so small distribution hubs on commercial streets in certain commercial districts at a pretty low square footage, around 5,000 square feet. There are exceptions for those willing to go through a review process to have a larger micro distribution on a commercial corridor. So that's what that question is in reference to, and just also want to state that this proposal for the last mile facility text amendment is focused on larger facilities. So we're thinking above that 50,000 square foot range and in our industrial areas. So just kind of setting that stage, I think the question of would a last mile special permit encourage more micro distribution is an interesting and a really good question, and would, love to incorporate that into our review of the proposal. I think generally what we've been seeing though is that these larger last mile facilities are hard to replace with a much smaller micro distribution hub.
All right, I want to actually keep going on the note of that. So you talk about square footage of a last mile facility. I have no idea how big these facilities typically are. How did you come up with that number?
Yeah, great Great question. So I think of the facilities we looked at, the average was about 120,000 square feet. So this like minimum threshold is more than half that size. So that gives you an idea of like what the average like full distribution is. Your question about how did we come up with the threshold? So I think in concept, what we're trying to do is say that small facilities should have an easier path to build than large facilities. It's the really large ones are the ones that we've heard the most concerns about very consistently. And so we have to draw the line somewhere. Right now, we've drawn it at 50,000 square feet. And part of this comment period is to like hear people's feedback on whether that's too small or too large.
I would say that my concern would be that I think we're going to see a proliferation of last mile facilities that are 49,000 square feet. You might even see warehouses that are like split into two, for example, and then consider two separate facilities when they're really one. I'd like to see the threshold be much lower or eliminated altogether, because 50,000 square feet, from what you're saying, it sounds like is entirely feasible for a company like UPS or Amazon or what have you.
I just say, sorry, I should have introduced myself. My name's Doug Rose. Juki is out tonight, so Maria and I and Emily are just like, yeah, playing his role for this evening. So nice to be here. And sorry, the PowerPoint was kind of small for those that couldn't see it, but we've given a copy to the board so they can, if anyone was having trouble reading it, we can arrange for that to be circulated so you guys can see all the small print. Yeah, exactly. Same.
Great. And so then another question I have is, if there's an existing facility that's say 50,000 square feet and it decides to expand, would that then trigger this process, or since it already exists, would it be able to just expand as of right?
Yeah, great question. So if you have an existing parcel delivery facility over this 50,000 square foot threshold and it wants to expand. So generally speaking, well, okay, sorry. First of all, we're in environmental review. So a lot of the text we have now is a bit more vague and less specific than what the specific zoning text would say. So zoning text is, once we enter that land use review portion of this, is where it would have details addressing that question. So I can answer just generally, but not for this specific proposal because it's not written yet. So generally speaking, you could write it either way in zoning. You could write it where an existing facility would need a special permit to do any sort of enlargement. You could write it how an existing facility could enlarge up to 10%. And if larger than 10%, it might need the special permit. So that's a comment we would love to hear, and it's not written yet.
So with this process that would be created, is it ULURP still? We're still calling it ULURP. So then the community board would have the same length of time to review and provide comment on all of these facilities?
Yeah, that's correct. So if the special permit went on the books, then each large facility that met the criteria would go through ULURP-like process. So it'd be the standard community board review, borough president review, C planning commission, C council, and they would also be required to do an environmental review.
Okay, so then I want to pivot to the vehicles. You talked about these facilities using vehicles in weight classes 1 through 5. And then what vehicle class would like a UPS truck be?
Yeah, so the kind of common UPS truck you see, or USPS, FedEx, that's covered in those weight classes we were talking about.
So you mentioned that there would have to be environmental remediation testing. My concern isn't whether, well, I am concerned about whether there's environmental issues on these sites, but also we've noticed with some facilities that do high levels of deliveries, the installation of in-ground gas or diesel tanks. Is that something that would be looked at as part of this, whether or not they would actually be contributing to making it a brownfield?
Don't know for certain on that question, so we'll get back to you, but I presume that that would be part of the DEC review that they would be doing for remediation and like what they plan to do on the site. So not 100% sure about that, but I think that would be included.
Yeah, wait, sorry. Also, in one of the findings, the one just generally called environmental impact, it was speaking about increasing greenhouse gas emissions, but it wasn't explicitly calling out the case you're describing. So another great comment for the findings. I think there we were thinking about just generally the use of diesel vehicles.
And I think that's all of my questions for now, so I'll turn it over this way to you two.
It's okay, I'll just add one more on that of like the general intention of the special permit. You know, Maria talked about one of the goals being trying to move these actors to use more sustainable delivery methods, like whether that's, and that like includes like EV adoption. And so that's like one of the explicit goals, and that's kind of built into this incentive mechanism to try and move these actors faster to EV than they would have otherwise. So that's like a kind of inherent goal. It was like the third goal, I think, of the proposal.
I actually have one more question that I just thought of. One of the things is, so since so many of these facilities so far have been based in our district, would it be possible to look at in the analysis of these proposed sites, job creation and potentially prioritize job creation for people who live in this community?
Yeah, I think there's complicated legal questions about local hiring restrictions. So we probably won't be able to go as explicit as that. But in general, like one of the findings of the City Planning Commission we've drafted is kind of talking more generally about highest and best use for the site, the appropriateness of the land use. And I think job density and job quality is something that people jump to automatically, and the city planning commissioners often bring up, as do the community boards and the elected officials who vote on this. Yeah.
I too have a bunch of questions. So first, I wanted to start out by saying I enjoyed the presentation, learned a lot. I also was able to watch the webinar that you had from April. And I think on it, you mentioned that the May 6th one, that part of the scoping review would be available online. I did not see that on your website. So I would ask you to double check and make sure that that's available, because if there's something I missed, I want to be informed. Next, following up on what Diana mentioned, the proximity to schools is a really important thing around here. Like, I think by 60th and 3rd is the most dangerous intersection in the neighborhood, and that is an area where there's warehouses right next to a school, and there's a lot of people coming and going. So if you start to have these distribution sites which have more trips than the average warehouse, that is even more conflicts with pedestrians. So when you're talking about like 500 feet from residences, I think it should be something like that for schools, or actually perhaps more, because 500 feet is very close. Yeah. Next, following up on your previous webinar, you talked about the desire to keep the warehouses and the commercial zone separate, and you mentioned that a little bit today. I was wondering how DCP is thinking about addressing the issues where these uses are kind of combined. And I'm thinking something about how something like Costco or Sam's Club is like a warehouse store, or Amazon is now moving to do distribution out of Whole Foods locations, or, you know, they're also having their other stores where they're trying to, you know, they're mixing and matching these things, and whether we might see companies start to try to get around these rules by having like a little retail in there. I'll ask that and then I'll go back to the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I think the distribution business is moving very quickly, very dynamically right now, and we're racing to keep up, and it is a challenge. I think on the retail example, like a business that's mainly for like going to the shop and buying products, and then they have a little bit of distribution. Generally, we would consider that to be an accessory use. And this is regulating the primary use. But where there's a bit of gray area there, right? I think if 90% of the store is like, we as members of the public can go in and take stuff off the shelves and buy stuff, and there's 10% of it is reserved for distribution, generally we would consider that accessory, but there is like a limit to that. We don't have like an exact number right now of like when that trigger is it 50% of the floor area? But generally when we've done this for other things like microbreweries, like where it's like a pub and a brewery, a manufacturing beer at the same time, we have set specific percentage distribution rules. And so that's something that we might need to do if we feel like that is a kind of a gray area in compliance. Or, yeah.
Very helpful. Next, I know that a lot of these regulations that you do have to be done through incentives, right? So you can't force people to use electric vehicles, but you can incentivize them by making the regulations easier. Along with that, you've talked about the moves to micro hubs and also some of the more sustainable deliveries. Like I think you mentioned the bicycles, and I know I've seen them in Manhattan where they have the little UPS and the Amazon ones that are on bicycles. Has there been any talk about requiring improvements to infrastructure to support those? And I'm thinking of here in our neighborhood, we have several streets where years ago they got rid of the sidewalks to facilitate warehouse uses. And, you know, people can't really walk to work because they're going through this maze of, you know, cars coming and going. Has there been any thoughts about how to address that, or whether, you know, that could be part of the requirements that they have to have this type of infrastructure so people can walk to work or to and from these facilities?
So just to clarify, your question is about on a site, there's this case where someone removed the sidewalk to,
I think it was decades ago that actually the sidewalk was removed, and there's been presentations about, you know, bringing it back, and that never happened. But yeah, there's more than one site here where there's no sidewalks in some of our manufacturing districts, and you know they're used for warehouse facilities. So there's trucks coming and going. I was wondering if there was discussion to try to avoid that in the future by incentivizing, but well, like what tools would you have to incentivize people to use these things like bicycle, like foot, like other ways to get them so we don't have that situation in the future?
So generally in the Department of City Planning and the zoning resolution and like legal authority is pretty securely locked to the zoning lot. And so that's like our zone of influence. And so we do control a little bit of the like the sidewalk, the curb cut. We have like bike parking space incentives, like you can get that discounted from your floor area and a few bits there. But so we have some opportunities to kind of have more design rules about what's on the zoning lot. But beyond the zoning lot, there's pretty limited ability for the special permit to influence what's going on. So there's kind of, it's more in the incentives for the design of the zoning lot. So like EV infrastructure, bicycle parking, control of curb cuts and things like that.
And I'm just going to combine two last things. With the incentive for the blue highways and, you know, making these permits as of right if they're by the water, how are you weighing the pollution from boats versus trucks? Because boats, a lot of them are they're also using diesel fuels, and I think they use dirtier diesel fuels that are more polluting. And if we start to have a lot of those, then it becomes a question of actually which is worse. And then related to that, going back to what was mentioned earlier about the clustering, you know, not only them clustering in the same area, but if you have a bunch of different owners, I'm thinking of how in Red Hook, Amazon has several different sites. You know, with this 50,000 square foot, if they have a lot of 49, this is the opinion part. I think that I want to echo what Diana said about that that should be looked at really heavily, so we don't have a bunch of really small sites from the same owner that are, you know, doing the same thing when they could have one facility that might reduce the impacts. So yeah, pollution was the question, and that was the opinion.
yeah, sure. Two questions. So for the first one about the pollution of boats versus trucks, I think generally we're still thinking that getting the, you know, hundreds or thousands of trucks off the roadways would be worth the trade-off. However, a comment we've heard previously and might align with what you're talking about, is right now that water dependent use is under an exemption. So if you are a water dependent parcel delivery facility, you wouldn't need the special permit. You wouldn't have to go through the process, but it could move to a finding. So it could move to a finding, and then that's where there would be more discretion and ability to think through those more complex topics on a site-by-site basis. And then for the question about the concentration or clustering of these facilities, we certainly see it. I mean, these facilities are permitted in our industrial zones. So in some industrial areas, there are fairly large clusters of these facilities. So right now, that's why we have the concentration criteria, the concentration finding that's thinking through, you know, in this case of Red Hook that you were discussing, if a fourth one was to go there, is that inappropriate? And so that's the goal of that finding.
Thank you.
Size threshold, I think it's, you know, reasonable. People could disagree. It's ultimately a judgment call. Like when we observed these facilities, we found very few that are below 50,000 square feet, and based on interviews and other kind of qualitative evidence, that it becomes challenging for these operators to make that economic, unless it's a kind of like cargo bike, like really small, very like neighborhood focused distribution. But that like bigger distribution where you have a lot of vans and bigger trucks, like 50,000, smaller than 50,000 square feet, just becomes like quite tricky to do all the maneuvering and traffic movements that have happened.
Hi. So I just wanted a quick clarification. Is this the 50 20th Street location? Okay. The reason why I'm asking is that currently I saw a listed location of a parcel delivery facility at Sunset Industrial Park at 50 20th Street for 220,000 square feet. And it includes 3 companies, FedEx, Bridge Industrial, and DHL. Is there a kind of a conglomeration of companies that would be using this upcoming site? Or is this, like, how is that divvied up? And I mean, is it being suggested that new delivery sites have multiple companies with it? Or is it more singular? Because some of these other locations that I've seen listed are only 1 or 2, but the one that's at Sunset Industrial Park has 3. Is this new one going to have 1, 2, 3 companies involved? And how does that affect delivery rates, property on site, storage, and even the idea of clustering? If it's only 1 company, are you more likely to cluster additional facilities around that? Or would you have 1 large one and just, how does that work? Please explain. I'm sorry.
Of course, I think I can see the piece of paper. I think this is like a list in one of the market reports we have, which I encourage everyone to check out. There's like a list of recently constructed warehouses, and we're not necessarily, some of them don't even have tenants yet. We're just kind of labeling like where construction has been happening and trying to identify the trends happening there. On the like, so I think of it kind of like retail, right? Sometimes a retail store, they'll build 1 big store and it's just a Macy's and it's only Macy's. And then sometimes you build like a kind of a bigger one where you have 2 or 3 tenants in there, and warehouses have a similar thing. So sometimes someone will build like a 1 million square warehouse, and then they'll subdivide it into 4 or 5 different units, and different tenants will take up those units. In terms of how the special permit works in a building like that, we generally say it's like per establishment. So it's not the building, it's the individual tenants. So if that tenant is taking up more than 50,000 square feet, like they would trigger a special permit. If the tenant next door is bigger than 50,000 feet, they would also have to get a special permit. So you could have 1 building which actually needs to get multiple special permits because it's kind of per allocated space or per establishment is what we say in the zoning resolution.
Okay, thank you. Would there be kind of an understanding, like playing off of Diana's question, for these, for schools, worship spaces, senior centers, would there be an understanding of scheduling deliveries around, concentrated times? School drop-offs, school pickups, church services, things of that nature. Like if senior centers typically have like grocery store runs, things like that, or community events, would that be considered?
Yeah, great question. Very sensible question. I think so. In zoning, we can only really regulate the use and its location. We can't really curate like business activities or opening hours of stores and other things. So generally how that happens is in the special permit process, they will talk to the elected officials or the community board and kind of negotiate appropriate operating hours. And then sometimes in the environmental review, if they're showing that there'll be conflicts of some time, then one of the recommended mitigations can sometimes be like business hours. So these things can get negotiated. I think the Whole Foods in Gowanus has various restrictions about like when they can load at night and stuff like that. So it does happen. Strictly speaking, it doesn't happen in zoning. It happens in like environmental review and then kind of just informally in negotiations with the council member. But it's not something that's written explicitly in zoning because it's not, we don't have the legal authority to kind of tell people when they can open and close and things like that.
Thank you. I was going to ask about if there was a possibility that we could suggest kind of environmental offsets as incentives, such as planting a certain number of trees in regards to amount of square footage of the plant, or if the facility is within like 1,000 square feet of another facility, if there are a certain number of tenants in the building, can we suggest environmental remediation that's on the kind of proactive side? And also, is there a consideration, or can we think about like stormwater flooding? Because flood zones are, pretty standard, but that happens once every 100 years. That's what we tend to study, but stormwater flooding happens like quarterly, if not more than often than that. And that's based on like, city industrial like facility of like stormwater drainage. Where is it being drained to? If it is a water-based or near water, is there environmental like restrictions that are attached to that?
That's a great question, and one we've heard similar concerns with before. So thinking about, are there environmental benefits that can be, drawn from these facilities? And right now, and I think this is a reoccurring comment we've been hearing, it's kind of written in the negative in the finding right now. It's saying, would this new facility contribute to stormwater runoff? Would it contribute to greenhouse gas emissions? But then it could also be in the reverse, where would it be, offsetting greenhouse gas emissions? Would there be, permeable surfaces, things like that? So I think certainly that's a great comment, and is one we can consider. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Emily Bachman. I'm a senior planner in the Brooklyn office at DCP. I want to add a plug for one of my favorite local regulations, which is the Unified Stormwater Rule, passed in 2021. And it requires all new developments over 20,000 square feet in the citywide, regardless of where they are, to capture stormwater from a storm. I want to get this right. I think it's a 1.7-inch storm. So pretty frequent storm. They have to be able to capture all that water on site and manage it, which slows down the stormwater going into our combined sewage system and reduces combined sewage overflow in the city. They're also, through that regulation, there are tiers, so they have to kind of max out green infrastructure before they move to gray infrastructure. It's honestly, I think it's like the coolest local law ever. So that is like the 20,000 square foot threshold that where the unified stormwater kicks in. Sorry, that threshold is covering any facility that would be covered by this special permit. And any new as of right development that's big in the city, no matter where.
That's all my questions.
Yeah, if anyone online wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. While that's happening, based on what Aaron asked about with the multiple tenants of one warehouse, my concern is that we could see some type of arrangement, like say somebody is buying things in bulk on Temu and then distributing them locally and has different kind of like shell companies, but it's really all one company. Like, how would that be like caught and identified? Or potentially, would it be better to just say that a warehouse, instead of having a permit for each tenant, should have the one permit for the whole warehouse?
The honest answer is that zoning wouldn't really capture the like one business with like multiple shadow businesses. Like the way zoning is kind of blind to the business. It's about the land use. And so it really just looks at, is this land use a parcel delivery facility, and then follows the regulation from that. The ownership of the business is not something that we have like the legal authority to regulate. So it's really just the land use specifically. So what you're talking about could be theoretically possible.
So then if it's about the building, right, then how do you know that it's intended for parcel delivery versus other warehouse-based activities?
Yeah, so Maria showed the definition that we have for a parcel delivery facility, and that was like pretty long and detailed, and we're looking for comments on that right now to make it, you know, as watertight as possible, and working with DOB, the Department of Buildings, who would be ultimately responsible for enforcing these regulations. So yeah, we're trying to yeah, there is a bit of a gray area, right, between what's just a regular Joe warehouse and a parcel delivery facility of these like really high intensity parcel sorting facilities. So we put a definition out, and we're like looking for comments on that.
Okay, so what I'm a little confused about now is it sounds like it would just be for new buildings.
Not necessarily for new buildings, for new spaces. So that could be in an old building. So it gets a little meta, so sorry if I'm not being clear, but let's say you have a existing warehouse, it's over 50,000 square feet, and a parcel delivery tenant moves in, that would need the special permit because they are like doing that use in that space, and that space was previously not used for that use. So it can apply to new or existing.
Okay, so that would be based on who the tenant is and not about the construction of the building.
Yes, it's more about the use of the building rather than the building itself or the business. It's like the use of the building. Yeah.
Okay, so then, because that kind of reverses what you were saying before about the multiple tenant situation, where there would be just, there, I guess it'd be a permit for each tenant.
There'd be a permit for each section of the building. So if you imagine like a kind of a site plan, and let's say it's a 1 million square building, a really, really huge building, and there were like 4 subspaces. This, you know, space 1 might have a special permit, and therefore like a parcel delivery facility could operate in that space, but the other 3 spaces would not have that special permit. So if another business moved into that space and tried to use that space as a parcel delivery space, they would need a special permit.
Okay, but then I'll let you jump in and then I'll have a follow-up question.
Part of what you're getting at is like what is the mechanism um, for, for actually enforcing zoning? And that is new development or, a change in use or like a substantial change in a building. So anytime that someone wants to build a new building, they have to go to Department of Buildings. Anytime they want to change the use group occupying a building, they need to get a new certificate of occupancy from Department of Buildings. And if they want to do a major expansion to a building, they need to go to Department of Buildings. So that's when Department of Buildings says, does what you're doing comply with your current C of O, your certificate of occupancy, and is it allowed in the zoning? So that's the trigger. So like an existing last mile facility today, if a special permit is created in the future and they don't change anything about the way they're using their facility, this special permit would not affect them. But if there's an existing 6-story warehouse in the neighborhood and they want to repurpose the building for a last mile facility and that use would take up more than 50,000 square feet within their building, that would trigger DOB to say you need a special permit to do this.
Okay, and so then wouldn't it be super easy to just subdivide all the spaces so that they're less than 50,000 feet?
Subdividing is pretty normal, but if it's the same business and they like are clearly using just both spaces and they just subdivided it, then DOB wouldn't accept that. So. On the business versus use versus building, I think I think to get the difference between like a use and a business, like one way to think about it is a hotel. So like a hotel is like a use, Marriott or Hyatt are like the businesses. And so the special permit applies to hotel space rather than like differentiating between like two different businesses.
Okay.
I do have a follow-up, actually.
Yeah,
So,
great.
So for example, if you are zoning something for a community facility, obviously you would have a tenant. If you subdivide the community facility space into multiple tenants, not each of those, the whole is kind of zoned under community facility, whether there are tenants under that as well, right? Is that correct? I'm sincerely asking because I just want to make sure that I'm fully understanding it. So if that is the situation for a community facility, how different is this scenario to what I just described? I'm honestly, legitimately trying to understand.
Way of doing it, but
All of this I fully understand is like reading instructions from a VHS installation guide. So this is part of the reason why
so
they're very open-ended questions.
zoning district, like on this map, each one you can look at it in the zoning resolution and it has a list of uses that are allowed for that space. And so like in an R6 in this yellow, there's a list of community facilities that are allowed. And when DOB, Department of Buildings, like sign off your certificate of occupancy, you can look at it and each floor, it will say like how much space is allocated for each use. So it might say community facility, this type of, house of worship, shelter space, library. Let's say that's like 3 different floors. And so that's how it kind of works in the purple. In the industrial area, obviously the list of uses is more industrially focused. And so it might say, but it has commercial and other things. And so on the certificate of occupancy, let's say you have one building, it might be the first floor, it will say is being used for office use and it's 20,000 square feet. The next floor up is being used as warehouse space and that's 20,000 feet. So it kind of just like labels each use and the Department of Buildings is just checking if those uses are permitted in that zoning district. And if there's size restrictions or special permits or other kind of approvals that you're needed, then they're like checking that you actually have those and then we'll issue you a certificate of occupancy.
I just want to add that this line of questioning is exactly why we're here. You have identified a potential loophole that if it does exist, and I don't think we fully have the answer to your question today, but we will be seeking it out, wouldn't be part of the intention of the proposed special permit. So that's why we're here. That's why we do public review, because the public review process makes public policy better. So thank you. We will look into it, and please submit a comment about this concern.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump in with one more question that I thought of, and then we're gonna go to folks online, and then we're going to folks on the room. So one of the issues that we have in this community district is that we have a major shortage of crossing guards. There's, a zillion openings for them. Would it be possible to add to what would be reviewed in an environmental review of a ULURP along these lines, the absence of crossing guards?
So I know in the environmental review process, particularly if it's a big construction, they definitely do junction analysis to make sure that the junction's nearby, the like level of service and safety. I don't know if that includes like the role of a crossing guard or not, but that's something that we can look at.
Okay, and actually, kind of just going back to basics a little bit with this, would each of these ULURP processes use the seeker manual scope, or would they have a scope in an EIS and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so each applicant who's seeking a special permit would have to go through ULURP, and a special permit triggers an environmental review, whether it's a EIS or an EA, which is like the smaller version of it. Depends a little bit on the size of the building, the current traffic conditions around, and like whether it reaches various trigger thresholds for more detailed analysis. So there would be an environmental review for each individual site seeking the special permit. The level of depth of the environmental review is. And then separately, we do an environmental review for this general policy change, which is what Maria talked about.
Right.
So we're doing an EIS to put this rule on the books, and then individual ones also have environmental review.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So then, is it possible to put in this zoning resolution that all of these facilities need to trigger an EIS? Because otherwise, neighborhood-specific concerns about things like crossing guards, they're not in the seeker manual, and we wouldn't really have the ability to have them weighed as factors in terms of the zoning.
Yeah,
That's not working.
right on. Try it again. That seems
Yeah,
like it's.
stay.
Can I give you this one?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so I don't think we're sure right now about how it would get covered in seeker, and can certainly get back to you, but the public review process in general, this City Planning Commission special permit is a discretionary action, so there is a lot of leeway to bring up topics like this, where in this neighborhood, crossing guards are an issue, but in another neighborhood, it might be something else. So I think there's a lot of room for site-specific, neighborhood-specific considerations in this public review process that might not already just be on a list of things that are covered, but community members, council members can bring up.
All right, Jeremy Kaplan, you're up.
Hey, thanks so much. Really appreciate this conversation because should have happened years ago, unfortunately, for Red Hook and Sunset Park. And I think the subdivision question is really important because we're seeing like Sunset Park industrial yards with their massive facility, they're actually opening it up to many different companies within the same site. So I think to emphasize like what that conversation was happening before, we need to figure out something around the subdivision idea. And then another thing is I had a question around how do you view facilities like Amazon that does the delivery for their Prime for the Whole Foods? They have like a facility in Sunset Park that is just pure delivery. Um, and there's a lot of truck traffic, a lot of vehicle traffic for that. And so I'm wondering that it's a smaller facility, but actually might have even more. And they're not really, are those sort of grocery store, but only delivery, they're not really considered a micro hub. So I think it's important that they're included within this sort of like special permit because the amount of they're probably under, I know the Sunset Park one is probably under 50,000 square feet. Um, and they produce just as much traffic, but it's a different type of vehicle, maybe even more traffic. And they also do run 24 hours as well too. So I'm curious, like I do think there needs to be a maybe a consideration of a different tier that's much lower square footage wise that also could include some of these kind of companies that basically are essentially last mile trucking, but for food. And it's not just sort of Amazon, but there's a bunch of other companies that do similar things around groceries and things like that, that produce just as much traffic and sort of last mile trucking.
All right. Thank you for your question. So why is food not being considered in this proposal? Um, so generally our focus has been on pre-packed packages. That's where we were hearing the greatest concerns over the last couple of months. And generally speaking, feeding New Yorkers is critical and we don't want to inhibit the flow of food. Um, Something that we want comments on and that you're getting at right now is something like this about food distribution. So it's not currently under our definition of a parcel delivery facility, the one I read earlier about pre-packed goods getting sorted. What we've been seeing in different food distribution facilities is that there is food stored, so inventory on storage, pick and pack. So that's where someone orders their food and it's taken off and it's, put into the delivery box. Um, our challenge was that what happens in some of the businesses you're describing is also what happens in other types of businesses as well. Thinking of Hunts Point, thinking of things like a food bank. So we were really struggling to draw a line between those different food uses. But if you have ideas for better ways to define this, we would love the feedback.
Jeremy, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think maybe the division could actually be between if it's direct to consumer, like I'm just thinking specifically, I can't remember all the names of the companies because I don't use them, but I definitely know the Amazon Whole Foods one. Um, but that versus Hunts Point, which is like wholesale distribution. So that seems like a different category versus something that is consumers ordering, which requires, direct like last mile trucking delivery. So I mean, I think that's a pretty easy distinction to make because wholesale distribution is going from, wholesalers to businesses versus the distinction of this is directly to consumers, which is exactly what last mile trucking is.
Jeremy, question for you. Are you talking about those like dark storefronts?
It's like they went out of business, but we had like Gorilla and a couple other ones that were like they were literally supermarkets that existed that were maybe about 15-20,000 square feet or so. And they made only direct like delivery to people. Like you couldn't, it was set up as a supermarket, but it was only delivery. And they had tons of like it was DoorDash and all the usual delivery companies would be outside of it. And so we had a few in South Slope and other areas, and I think even one tried to start up. But that's the kind of business that is totally like a last mile for food grocery that has died down now. But I assume, somebody will start up with this coming up again.
Yeah, and it's also just for you guys, some of those are in commercial zoning districts and not manufacturing zoning districts. And
Totally.
so it's kind of creating these dark storefronts in a place where there should be, an active, vibrant business community where people can go. And so it
Totally.
decreases the quality of the experience of the people walking down those commercial corridors. So yeah, I totally agree with Jeremy. That's definitely something we want to flag for you guys. Jeremy, did you have any other questions? I guess not. Okay.
I think well, one quick question is whether some of the other questions would be how much of this can also retroactively apply to um existing facilities, especially given the fact that we have a huge cluster in Red Hook of these existing facilities. Like how much can we retroactively apply some of the environmental issues and other safety concerns from this?
Yeah, the retroactive application is a great one because the concerns are from facilities that exist today, not the hypothetical future ones we're talking about with the special permit and would go through the special permit process. Generally speaking, in zoning, if something was opened under certain regulations, it's allowed to operate because it was legal when it opened. And so that's how the existing facilities would be treated. That said, it does go back to the question earlier about what if you have an existing facility and it wants to do something like expand, and that's where there is flexibility in zoning to write something specific. But if a parcel delivery business is in operation today, the special permit becomes reality and is in the zoning resolution and it continues to operate as it is today, that would be permitted.
All right, great. Committee members in the room, here now is your chance. Start with John. Okay. I guess use this.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm wondering, so I think my primary concern is just about the equitable distribution of them, which is the findings. I'm wondering if you could go through in more detail, like exactly how the findings factor into the decision-making processes. Is it like, if it is, like a cluster of them, is that prohibitive? Is it just a knock against them? Like, what's the actual kind of calculation?
Yeah, that's a great question. How exactly do these findings work in reality? So the Department of City Planning, there are different types of approvals that we have. So a city planning commission special permit is one type of approval and is what we call a discretionary action. So it leaves this gray area. It leaves a gray area for conversations about crossing guards, things like that. On the other hand, it's not a black and white, check yes or no if you're fulfilling something. So this one about the concentration of existing facilities in disadvantaged communities that are already subject to environmental pollution, there's not a this means that. Like you don't just check it's there's too many of them because there's 10 of them. And so the kind of gray area allows for better conversations at the local level, but in determining exactly what it means for that finding, there's not just like a checkbox.
Okay, so just to add to that, from the borough office perspective, we are the ones who get applications for special permits. I would say first, applications for special permits are very rare. I think we're being transparent about the fact that if there's a special permit for last mile facilities, a lot of the development community sees that as a major barrier to developing them, because ULURP is long and it is unpredictable. So I think first, we see very few applications for special permits, for better or worse. And second, if we have an applicant coming to us for a special permit, we are getting them to public review by ensuring that their application is complete. And we're pushing them really hard to respond to the findings, to meet the conditions and respond to the findings up front so that by the time it gets to ULURP, they've been completely transparent about how they believe they're meeting the conditions and responding to the findings. But ultimately, the commission and then the community board and then the borough president and then the city council member all have a chance to weigh in on how they believe the findings should be met and what kind of special conditions should be placed on an application before approval, if it's approved at all.
And just add it, as well as it being weighing in, like ultimately the city council member and the city planning commission have a binding vote on it. So if they don't think it meets the findings, they have the ability to reject it.
And one other unrelated question, just so I understand better, but what's considered best practice when it comes to electric fleets? Like, are those charged all on site, or like, what's preferred and what's standard?
I think it really varies based on the site you have and its connection to the grid. Like, it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. Like, you might own one plot of land that's has a lot of grid capacity, and therefore like adding EV infrastructure on site can make a lot of sense. Other sites are not so lucky. The grid is like getting close to capacity there, and sometimes you charge off site. So I think ideally there's like lots of like economic questions as well for each operator, but the newer warehouses that we've seen, they tend to have parking on the roof and like use a kind of multi-story approach. And so they can charge vans overnight there. Right now they tend to be using the like slower overnight chargers and then run the vans in the day, but there are these faster chargers coming out now where they can kind of get a full tank in like a matter of hours or even like minutes rather than like the whole evening. So I think it's still very much like an evolving area, and each operator, depending on their fleet, chooses different things. Like most of the conversation we're talking about, parcel delivery facilities, they use like smaller vans or like UPS trucks or whatever that take less time to charge compared to like a 50-foot truck. So it's quite variable.
Is there a way to incentivize the like new applicants to have on-site charging facilities?
Yeah, so the special permit Maria talked about has an explicit incentive for EV. So we're saying if you are, 500 feet from a residential district and you're investing heavily in EV infrastructure, there is an as-of-right pathway for you. And so there's a strong incentive to invest in EV infrastructure built in. We're like seeking comments on what the standard should be for that EV infrastructure. But yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question on that. So this neighborhood has a few peaker plants, high pollution power plants that are only used sometimes. Are you doing any kind of assessment about how much new strain this will add to the electrical grid? And during those hot days when everyone's running their air conditioner, would this be, creating a material increase in the amount of pollution in our neighborhood?
That's a great question. We can write that down and talk to our environmental review folks who are doing the more technical analysis. So thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed all these questions. I've been writing down answers to questions and then more questions. So this is really useful from everyone. I have some comments and questions. So just a finding in this context, a finding is something that is put into the environmental impact statements.
The finding is what you see the city planning commission and city council using to determine if an applicant could receive their special permit. The environmental review chapters like transportation, energy, schools, open space, that would be part of the environmental review that an applicant would also need to go through. So it's kind of two separate points, if that makes sense.
EAS is separate. The findings are put into what exactly?
They're put into the special permit itself.
So in order to determine this, whether you get the special permit, the question is, what is your impact on these categories, or like how do these categories apply to your application?
Yeah, that's how the findings would work. And then an applicant seeking a special permit would also need to do environmental review. And it was what was being talked about earlier, where an applicant would need to go through an EAS or an EIS, depending on the project.
Okay. just to clarify, do you think that there's a loophole here where people could chain together small facilities? I get the impression that you're saying you don't think that that's going to happen, because if somebody tried to do that, the Department of Buildings would reject that application. So,
You can open under these rules, the proposed rules and the rules today, you can open a small distribution warehouse. If it's below 50,000 square feet, like as of right, that's true today. That would be true under the current proposal. So those are as of right, and they're allowed to open. I think the case that you brought up just at the end there that someone else brought up was like, if it was like on one kind of lot and there was someone pretending to be 4 different businesses when they were all kind of the same business, and it was clear when the Department of Building officer went over that that was the case, like they would call them out on that.
okay, so it's not going to happen in your estimation, basically. Yeah. The water delivery and the electric vehicle exemptions. So wait, what is it's 500 feet if you're 500 feet or more from residential area, but you're also incorporating a certain level of electric vehicle delivery, you get exempted. So you can be as close as 500 feet, but if you meet a certain threshold of electric vehicle infrastructure.
Yeah, that's correct. And just so it is both the being 500 feet or more from a zoning district that permits residences, and you have sufficient electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So it could be a facility that's 501 feet with sufficient electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Again, this buffer size is open for comment, and just wanted to contextualize the 500 feet. Generally, when we think of 500 feet, other buffers that exist in zoning typically are smaller than this, and 500 feet is around 2 blocks.
And what is sufficient, the sufficient infrastructure?
We don't know. That's what we're hoping to get comments on through this public review process. There are a couple of different ways you could think about what sufficient infrastructure looks like, and we want to hear from people what it is. I will just give an example. One way that you could have sufficient, one way that someone could think of sufficient electric vehicle charging infrastructure is having your conduit laid, right? Having your conduit and you have outlets there, and all you need to do is plug in your chargers. So maybe that's what sufficient is. Maybe sufficient is something more along the lines of, based off of the size of the facility, you need X number of chargers. I think there's a lot of different ways that could be written, and we're hoping to hear from people.
Thank you. I'm trying to move through the list as efficiently as possible here. The water delivery exemption. So if somebody wanted to open up a new facility here in Sunset Park that was on the waterfront or in Red Hook that was on the waterfront, and a company drove material to Jersey and then floated it to that facility, would that facility now be exempt, even if it was a 100,000 square foot facility, because it was receiving waterborne freight that had been driven to someplace else?
That's correct as is currently written, but we're looking for comments on that. So yeah, it's the criteria is a operational like docking facility, basically. So you have to like have all the infrastructure there. But yes.
Okay. Mike, okay. Why is there any size level at all? If the issue is the impact of these facilities on communities, why even introduce a 50,000 square foot or any limit at all? Why not just have it apply to any such facility?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think like we're looking for comments on the size threshold or its appropriateness, just like full stop. Conceptually, I think, Emily mentioned it. The special permit is a very high bar. It's the highest level of scrutiny that we have in the zoning resolution. There's a kind of gradating schedule from like as of right, chair cert, authorization, special permit. So special permit is the most intensive review. And so we generally reserve it for the most impactful types of development. And so that's where the size threshold logic comes in, that smaller facilities have smaller impacts in general, and therefore like the special permit is kind of reserved for the most intensive ones. Maria showed that, you know, the steps, it's like community board, borough president, C planning commission, C council, environmental review, then you go to Department of Building. So it's like a lot of steps. So we generally reserve it for where the scrutiny is like really needed. But that's a value judgment and something that you guys can comment on.
Okay, again, I just have a couple more ideas. Does DCP think that this will significantly limit the number of new facilities that are created? I got the impression that you're saying you think it will, and maybe an example of this is the special permit that was created for the storage facilities. What was the impact on that, or on those facilities after that special permit was created?
Yeah, great question. So I'll do that last bit first and then go back to the first bit. So where we introduced a hotel special permit, I believe there's only been 2 applications since that went into force. And then with self-storage, there's only been 2 applications as well.
The whole city?
Whole city.
And how did that compare to before?
I don't have the numbers, but it's in the tens. So like, yeah, somewhere between 10 and 100 applications a year for self-storage.
There have only been 2 since for self-storage.
Multiple years.
So I thought I heard at one meeting in the past that DCP, there was a concern that if something like this goes into effect, that basically you're not going to get any more of these facilities in New York City, which means you're going to get more of them outside of New York City, which is going to have the unintended effect of just further clogging roads, because now you're just driving this stuff further, you're driving it over the bridges.
Great question. So in the draft scope of work, we actually lay out these 2 exact scenarios you're talking about. So we do say there'll be fewer facilities in the future, and we kind of try and model that out, and we're asking for public comment on that. And then we do explicitly say that we think some of the facilities will not want to go through the special permit process, and therefore will locate in, you know, Westchester, Nassau, New Jersey, and then there might be vehicle miles traveled, unintended consequences of actually creating more traffic and more pollution. And so it's a really hard balance that we're trying to strike here, where we want to have the community have appropriate review of these facilities, but also not make it so restrictive that then there's unintended pollution consequences, like the net benefit is changed. So there's a balance there. We're asking for your comments on whether you think we got the balance right. And that is partly why we have some as of right exemptions, right? We're kind of saying in principle, like if you're far from where people live and you're really investing in EV, then maybe that facility is appropriate. So we're trying to make those balance. But that's all written explicitly in the draft scope of work, and we're excited to get people's comments about it.
Okay. The impact on schools, I do think that that's critical to include here. I mean, if there's some way of including the quality of life of students and parents, I mean, it's you know, in Red Hook on the Basis Independent School had 2 facilities open on either side of it, as you know, totally changed as far as I can tell, just like the physical layout, at least of the area around the school. So I think impact on schools is critical. Does any of this apply, or is there any loophole here for drone delivery, which is, I believe, an area of heavy investment and increasing prototype? So if you drove stuff to a facility, but you were not sending it out by van or by truck, but you were sending it out by drone, will this apply equally to that?
We can take a look at that. Yeah. We'll check the definition of parcel delivery facility and try and make it resilient to that. So great comment. I think right now they're not legally allowed to deliver, but that could change in the future, because we are using drones for 1 or 2 other activities, so it's possible.
And I believe it's being it's being tried in different cities, I believe, right? It's being all right. Let me just for everybody out there. So if they want to stay involved in this process going forward after the 16th, which is obviously, is that, 2 days from now. so how do we continue putting in input? What should we do?
Yeah, so I'm recognizing the 16th is this Friday. The reason why that date is important is just because these are the comments that make it on an official public record. That said, we're taking comments all the time. So we are open to having more conversations if, people are able to watch this recording and have questions later. So we're opening to receiving feedback at any point. It's more just if you want to have it written down, your name associated with your comment on the public record for the 16th.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Opportunity for CB7 to put on the record comments as well. Like, we haven't started the land use review process yet. So that's like the more typical place where CB7 provides very detailed comments. And so once we've got a draft EIS and this project gets what's called referred into ULERP, it legally has to come back to CB7 with the proper full legal text, which will talk about all these kind of topics that you guys have brought up. We'll have a definition of what sufficient EV infrastructure is, have a definition of like how partitioning would work, etc. And that you guys would provide like hopefully line by line, but also general endorsement or not endorsement or with conditions and all of that. So just wanting to say, to add to what Maria said, that you can basically email us your ideas anytime, but there will be another formal CB7 on the record comment period as well. So.
I just have a last thing, and just for 60 seconds, I'm just going to just quickly express a couple of my opinions. I think the water delivery and the electric vehicle exemption should be taken away, because I think I understand what you're saying about incentivizing certain usage, but I think the issue is the use itself and its impact on communities. So I'm concerned that those exemptions will allow for this continued use in a different form, but the use itself still continues. So I think it succeeds in one direction and then is counterproductive in another direction. I do think you should increase the impact increase focus on impact on schools. What Diana was just saying about impact on electrical grids is critical. I have many comments have been made about the subdivisions, and we really need to clarify that if there's any sort of loopholes or holes there. Increasing, having one of the findings be job density. I mean, to my understanding, these are not job dense facilities. And this just leads me to my last overall comment. So, I've been, for whatever it's worth, I'm opposed to these facilities in general. Obviously, millions of square feet went to them in Red Hook just within the last few years. There are places in Sunset Park. I just want to offer this is my soapbox comment, which I will wrap up as quickly as possible. I think the overall framing when I hear presentations and talks, is that this is an unstoppable market force that everyone loves. And the goal is to just try to make it fit better with the city, because it's never going to go away. I can understand that from a practical planning standpoint. This is not even really directed at DCP, but I don't think that that's true. I think that countries can make decisions about their economic direction. Cities can make decisions about what industries are encouraged or not. I'm not a fan of the Trump administration, but the Trump administration is trying to use tariffs to change what gets brought into the country and where it's made. That's a choice. When it comes to whether we want Amazon to be bigger, to do more of what Amazon does, for example, it was the elected officials representing these areas, Nydia Velasquez, Jerry Nadler, Eric Adams, Bill de Blasio, and Andrew Cuomo, among 70 other elected officials, who signed a letter encouraging Amazon to double its corporate footprint and move into New York City. That was an office project, but it was about Amazon getting bigger and doing more and more and more. And then, lo and behold, within a few years, you get a ton of last mile facilities in this area, and a bunch of them are dedicated to Amazon. That's a policy choice that New York City can make. We have options. I don't think that this has to happen. And I don't think it's inevitable that last mile has to happen. And my final comment is just like, I think my concern here is that the last mile and the rapid shipping, I understand it's a huge market. I think I heard just the other day that there are 180 million people in the United States that have Amazon Prime, a stunning number. But that's not that's a different market than has existed in the past. It's a different type of delivery that has existed in the past. And I think we in this community and people everywhere need to decide if that's an economic use that they are excited about continuing and expanding, because one of the consequences of that is that you have to move that stuff, and that stuff has to get put somewhere and shipped. And we should be thinking about that holistically. And I would ask this board and this community to make sure that elected officials are thinking about that, for example, before they sign letters asking for that use to get bigger and bigger and more expansive. So that's not a DCP thing, but it is an overall political thing that DCP and everybody else has to respond to. So that's my soapbox comment. And thank you again for all of this very useful commentary and questions.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, great. So thank you, all of you, for presenting. We appreciate it enormously. This has been a fantastic dialogue. A little business of what comes next for us. Obviously, Friday is the deadline for feedback, and we do not have quorum. So we as a committee cannot send a letter. So what I would like to do is, based on John's meticulous notes, create a letter and ask all of the community board members to send it in under their names as an individual comment. So functionally, hopefully it'll be the same as if the community board sent a single letter from the auspices of the community board. Now, I do want to kind of reiterate the point that they made, that this is really only the beginning. So at this point, there's been an environmental assessment. That environmental assessment has said that more information is needed, which is always the case with a citywide text amendment. And now we're in the scope of work, which dictates what gets studied in the the EIS. And then after there's an EIS, there will be a certification, and then we will hear from it again. So we're really getting our feet in the front door on this process, and we will have more meetings about it, and we will have more opportunities to weigh into it. So yeah, if anyone has any additional comment, please send it to whom? So who's, am I, what? BKO7, ASAP, so that we can turn this around and have the letter provided to board members for their sending as soon as possible. Any questions on that? That's the idea. So we're all amplifying the same concerns. You obviously are welcome to send your own additional comment. That's not you're not restricted from doing that in any way. All right, any other questions? All right, great. Well, I understand there was a basketball game that we're all missing. So